Thank you for the invitation. Now, I work in Brussels, and my job is really to advocate the green economy in Brussels and in the policy-making spheres, with a particular emphasis on climate change. And of course, Europe is undergoing an economic crisis, the like of which we haven't seen in the history of the European Union. In the situation we're in Brussels, there's a lot of people who are worried about generating growth and jobs in this difficult economic context. And there is a feeling among some people that the advocates of a green economy are different, that the green economy is somehow a different species of economy from the real economy. They talk about helping the real economy. And I have to break that idea that the green economy is something else, something out there that NGOs advocate. So it's trying to normalize the concept. It's not something radically different. What it does, essentially, is emphasize some rather old-fashioned values, such as saving, husbandry, careful management of resources, being economical, reusing, recycling, those sorts of things. In fact, they're kind of old-fashioned values of, someone comes to mind, in my mind, it's Mrs. Thatcher. She was Prime Minister from 1979, just after the IMF actually had gone into the UK in the 1970s to help the UK. And she was the daughter of some shopkeepers. And she used to repeat very often that, you know, the traditional values of shopkeepers was that you saved your money when times were good, you didn't overborrow, you worked damn hard, of course, and I feel that those older values are actually quite compatible with green economy values. We need, however, new mindsets, new inventiveness, because technologies have changed. We need to think about things that haven't necessarily been thought of before, like pricing pollution. I mean, in Dublin, when I was a kid, water was free. It rains a lot in Ireland, but water was free. And that is just a misallocation of resources because it wasn't really free. And gradually, I think policymaking has to start pricing things properly. And we have to think of new ways of doing things. I'll give you some examples during my talk, but I think one of the key messages is that the green economy doesn't need different solutions to what they call the real economy, the normal economy. In actual fact, the same structural reforms that are being advocated now in Europe, such as labor market flexibility, manageable debt levels, those are needed in the case of a green economy too. So they've got to be done as well. Let me give an example though. I want to portray the green economy as something that we've already got a lot of. My own case is I've owned my house for about 18 years. Since 1994, when I bought it, I've reduced my gas consumption by 47%. I keep a record of these things, I'm sorry, but the guys who I got to put insulation in my roof were just normal builders. One day they were putting insulation in my roof, and the next day they were building new walls, new houses. They didn't think of themselves as having green jobs, they just thought of themselves as builders. Another example is when I got the boiler changed, the central heating boiler. It was just the central heating plumber. He also fixes my toilet when it gets blocked and so on. And I think we've got to try to conceive of the economy as having a green component and then trying to expand it. And we're doing that in policy-making terms in Brussels. And the word we use is mainstreaming. Now, when I say to you Europe, people think of the common agricultural policy, cohesion policy, the EU budget, it might be energy policy or industry, in all of these policy areas, we are trying to mainstream climate concerns or environmental concerns into those other policies. And that is our method of trying to green the economy. If we can make the Transport Commissioner greener or the Energy Commissioner greener, we are getting there to reach the green economy. So that mainstreaming is the method we use. And there is, I will say, an inbuilt conservatism in policymakers everywhere, in Brussels, in national capitals, because the people who have run the Common Agricultural Policy for the last 50 years, because it is 50 years old now, they haven't been used to thinking about climate. And so we've got to change and educate and convince and persuade. And we're trying to do that. For example, in the new EU budget that will start in 2014, we're imposing the direct payments that farmers get from Europe. 30% of those direct payments will be conditional. Farmers will only get them if they do things which we want them to do and which are good for climate, such as preserve their grasslands, or diversify their crops, or set aside some land for ecological, just leaving it to develop as it would do. Those conditions are then built into the Common Agricultural Policy and the direct payments that farmers get, and then the farmers start doing it. We're trying to do that and to show them that it actually also enhances the farming's long-term viability, which we do. So we're trying to eliminate this inertia. And I'll give you another example of inertia. We're all like that. Human nature has that. In the UK, they discovered that the reason people didn't insulate their roof space was very often because their attic was full of old stuff and they didn't want to empty their attic. And I can identify with that. My roof space is like that too. So the UK tried to overcome that by offering to clean people's attics for free. And then they were prepared, and in fact the buy-in to insulation was much, much better. So it was overcoming the inertia. And another powerful instrument that's been used in the UK to overcome inertia is to tell people how much energy the neighbors use. And funnily enough, when the data for a street was posted in all the letterboxes, you know, this street has an average electricity and gas consumption of this much per household, people wanted to beat that. There was that competitive instinct in mankind that said, hey, I can do better than that. And they wanted to. And so these are sometimes new ways of thinking about very old problems. Okay, I want to just make a parallel between the climate problem that we've got and the euro crisis, because I think that's topical. The euro crisis and the economic crisis is at the forefront of everybody's mind. And I just want to say that I think there are some parallels which we should bear in mind. The euro crisis built up over several years, many years perhaps. Opportunities for structural reforms were missed when the times were good, before the trouble started. Now it's an imperative. We could have done it under less pressure before, but there's an inclination not to do it if you can avoid it. I think also in the euro crisis we're understanding that we're all in it together. Solidarity is a prerequisite. That's very much the case for the climate system as well. We're all in it together. And I think, as has been said by the previous speaker, that we can't just try and get over this crisis and get back to the way we were doing it before the crisis arrived, or we will get into the same troubles again. We can't revert to how it used to be. And that is true also for the climate, in that when economic growth comes again, we must make sure that our emissions do not rise as quickly as our GDP rise. We must do things differently. I think one of the good stories that I tell in Brussels is that this green economy is also an economy full of opportunities. We've heard a bit about the opportunities, the green jobs that exist, and I have emphasized they exist in every sector, the building sectors, but all of those sectors of the economy that are covered by the greenhouse gas emissions trading system, which we have in Europe, where the pollution has to be paid for. Every auto producer who wants to sell cars in the European Union has to comply now with CO2 standards. Every biofuel producer has to comply with sustainability criteria. So my contention is that the green economy is already there, but we want to expand it. And I think we can do that using all the possibilities that we will have in the future, using information and technology applications to better manage our energy and transport systems, to use technologies, solar, heat exchangers, geothermal. And just to give an example, today in Copenhagen there's an annual wind conference. It takes place over a number of days, but it's going on today. Just for your information, wind energy has an average annual market growth rate over the last 17 years of 15%. We dream of growth rates like that. There are some sectors which are still thriving, and in 2011, it actually grew 21%. And that was in the depths of the recession. So there are some sectors that are growing, and they tend to be largely also in the green sectors, if you like. And then remember, we were hearing the numbers of imports that were made in 2011 in Portugal. For the EU as a whole, the total trade deficit of the EU is about 150 billion euros. And the same year, 2011, we paid 315 billion for oil imports. So we pay more than double our trade deficit in energy. So in fact, energy is the thing that we're really in deficit over. And that money, the oil imports represent money outflows. And only a small share of that outflow comes back. Isn't it better to husband our own resources so that we can consume less energy and indeed produce more of it ourselves through indigenous renewable energy? What can policymakers do? Well, we can do some tax shifting. Because nowadays we all have to increase revenues, decrease expenditures. But we have to do them in a smart way. So by tax shifting away from labor towards pollution, that is an opportunity that we must take. And as policymakers, we try to help it happen. And the greenhouse gas emissions trading scheme is one way where we make the polluters pay. And we're making them pay in an increasing number of sectors. You probably have read in the newspapers, aviation industry is protesting, especially in third countries, they're protesting very loudly that they're being included into the scheme. But let's face it, the people taking the aeroplane from China to Europe, Latin America, or North America to Europe, are not the poorest segments of the population. And these are very modest charges, but we think the aviation sector should be paying its way, like other major sectors of the economy. We try to provide more information through labeling. For example, at the European level, we require labels on the fridges, labels on your cars, the CO2 performance of cars, so that the consumers can decide better. We try to ensure greater predictability for businesses by setting targets to 2020, and we hope beyond that very soon. We sometimes set mandatory standards. We have done so for cars, we have done so for biofuels, we've done so for interest in Brussels, because then people look up and say, oh, is there something in it for me? And if we can convince them that there is, we get people to change their behavior. Thank you very much.